Hey everybody, Tony G with another Screenwriter fix. And today I'm going to attempt to fix The Walking Dead. Ugh, I know. The Walking Dead is pretty unfixable. The show follows the comic book, if you've never seen it, and it's a zombie TV series. The problem with the show is the problem with zombie movies in general. The most exciting part about a zombie movie is the beginning, when everybody's getting overrun by zombies and you see how it breaks out and spreads, and then the ending where everybody either dies or they come to some realization that they're going to move forward into the safe zone or whatever. The problem, of course, with The Walking Dead is they're trying to take that concept and stretch it out over many, many episodes. And I think the reason for the show's success is just, this is a really cool subgenre. I'm a huge fan of it. I review just about every zombie movie that comes out. I'm looking forward very much to the sequel to Train to Busan, Peninsula. And but the thing is, as a TV show, you kind of got to do it differently. And you can't do movie plots in a TV show. It's very hard. And adapting a comic book to a television show is normally, that's a good thing. But the problem with The Walking Dead is a lot of the big reveals in comic books don't quite work in a TV show. And that's not the fault of the producers. That's more the fault of the medium's sort of changeover. However, that being said, and this is just my opinion, this whole thing, I was universally appalled at everything that took place on The Walking Dead after the season finale from the first season. Everything up until that last episode wasn't bad. It followed the various stressors between the characters. They had to avoid these monsters. There were a couple really dumb scenes with people getting bit and killed that were uneven, I would say. They were horrific, but they were horrific in a way that was so uneven, I felt that didn't quite work. But that's just me. What I wanted to see was something more. Well, they changed things from the comic book, and I cannot totally blame the producers for that, but when you change from the comic book, you have to improve upon things. And I don't think they really embraced the concept, which was the people in the survivors are almost as bad, or if not worse, than the zombies. I mean, that was the core concept of the show. And they embodied that maybe 75% of the time, but the other 25%, they would just kick up the gore. They would just kick up the gore, or they would just do something outrageous, regardless of whether it flew in the face of what had happened before or not. And I had never seen a show that, in my view, was so poorly shot. I actually could see how poorly the blocking was on The Walking Dead. The blocking on that show was an absolute nightmare. And spoilers ahead, by the way. So you've got the episode where Glenn dies the first time. And Glenn was the main character of the show, and this was supposedly a big deal. He's standing on this dumpster with this guy who's clearly going to die. I mean, he's just a panicky Pete. Really, they should have killed him early on because he gets a guy killed. And, that, quite frankly, at that point in the show, I wouldn't have been surprised if Glenn had just walked up to him and killed him after what he did. But he doesn't. He tries to bring him in, tries to help him, but he's punished for it. But not in the way that, oh, Glenn's so good, he just does this. Glenn just does it. Because the writers decide that, I guess, or the showrunners. And so the guy, him and Glenn are trapped up on the dumpsters, which flies in the face of what has gone before. The zombies can clearly climb at least that high. They can clearly reach and get you. They've reached people before. And instead, they just can't. They're just like, oh, this dumpster's too high. Oh. And then this guy shoots himself. And in the process, Glenn is holding on to him and gets pulled off the dumpsters with him into the zombies. Which, again, is stupid, too. Because you would think, blam, the guy shoots himself. Glenn's just going to be like, whoa. No, he goes down. Which is like, okay, Glenn's done. No. What happens is the guy falls on top of Glenn and the zombies eat the guy on top. But Glenn somehow manages to scoot under a dumpster that in other shots of this mess is really only about this high. And dumpsters aren't that high on the ground. Let's be honest. And it's already been established in the show that zombies can get under things, and they will, to get at people. So the entire scene is played out. You think Glenn's dead, and then next season, he's back. He was under the dumpster and managed to hide from the zombies. Makes zero sense within the context of the show. But backing that up to the CDC final first season episode, the CDC was added in the show. And I guess it was used to explain the disease because they couldn't stop explaining it over and over and over. So they get inside the CDC, and almost immediately the guy who's running it is depressed and ready to kill himself. And just as they get settled in, the guy basically announces, oh, the place is going to blow up and we're all going to die. To which everybody's like, whoa, we got to get out of here. And suddenly there's this magical time limit. And that's why that episode's terrible. So, if I was going to fix the show, the easiest ways would be, number one, reboot, obviously, would solve all the problems. You could start fresh, fix all the problems. Number two, and this would be the only way, in my view, to do it, to cancel out all the bad continuity errors from that point on, you'd have to go back to that episode or right before and reveal that it was all a horrible dream. Which, again, lame idea. I totally admit it. You'd have to show that it was some sort of simulation, something. Again, it's not really going to work, especially now. The show's so long in the tooth. It's been going on for so long. And now it barely makes any sense. Because, let's be honest, zombies are supposed to rot and they're supposed to fall apart. How long would the zombies actually survive and still be able to move around? The physics of zombies doesn't really make any sense in the long term. So, honestly, I think the only way to fix the show as it stands now would be to take some of the characters, whoever's left, and move them in a completely different atmosphere, or start with a group of new characters in a new part of the world and just start fresh. Just start completely fresh and say, okay, here are these characters. Now, they're trying to do that with the new kid version of Walking Dead, but it looks woke and terrible. And I don't think that's going to work either because they're kind of pushing it as a young adult fantasy kind of storyline. I don't know what the obsession is with young adult fantasy. I really don't understand it. To me, it's all the same. It's like, the Hunger Games and Harry Potter and a handful of other things did really well. And I understand that that's a genre that people like, Twilight. But my God, if you go online to my writing community, 75% of the people are doing young adult dystopian fantasy novels about showing daddy who's boss. And they're just all the same. And I'll be so glad when this trend dies horribly and no one wants to touch young adult fantasy ever again. But that's what that relaunch feels like. Fear of the Walking Dead started fairly well, I thought. It was a different take. It was going to start on the West Coast. They ended up on a boat. But ultimately, that suffered, I think, from the same problems. They just kind of would do these outrageous things It really wasn't much of a story and didn't make much sense, because you'd like to see that some people in that world would actually not necessarily go out of the way to help people, but not be jerks. See, Hollywood has this thing like, well, we can't just show a guy not helping. We have to show that they deserve to be killed. And, there was even a lot of that in the original Walking Dead. But some of that works. In the original Walking Dead, they had an episode where Rick and some of his crew go into a bar and they run into these guys who escaped Philadelphia. And it's clear these guys are bad guys, that they killed their way out of Philadelphia. And Rick immediately senses that they're criminals. And then they end up in a shootout where, of course, Rick wins because he's a sheriff and he's the main character and he's a badass. And that worked pretty well. I thought that worked pretty well because these guys were presented as scumbags who survived, not as your typical person. But that was fairly early on in the series where there were still some nice people they would run into. But they never quite got the logic of what was going on. It seemed like because they were changing so many showrunners, they were constantly changing the rules of the game. It was like playing a video game where, okay, you just played this game where you got good at shooting. Guess what? Guns don't work now. Now you got to kill everybody with a sword and learn like 5 different moves. And you'd be like, damn it, I just got good at shooting the gun. That's what The Walking Dead always felt like me. Like every season and a half, the whole thing would change. And I'd just be like, well, what does this mean? This doesn't make any sense. So I guess what I'm saying overall, that The Walking Dead really is not something worth fixing. It's something you need to start over, or which will probably happen somewhere down the line once the series ends and some time passes. I mean, it was too successful not to relaunch for AMC, I think. Really, it keeps going on, I think, because what else does AMC have, really? They've made so much money on it. I think, though, they really need a new take, a new horror show. I think AMC could become the horror channel if they played it right. Unfortunately, I think a lot of entertainment people, they don't really think to the future, and that's part of their short-sightedness a lot of times. Low power. And so they don't really think like in terms of spinning off other shows. When I mean other shows, I don't mean Fear of the Walking Dead or this young adult thing. I mean like a new show, like, I don't know, a mummy show or a vampire show or something with horror that people could have started to get into, play it after The Walking Dead, and then, maybe gain an audience, American Horror Story or something. Because it seems to me that AMC did well in that route, and that's what it was turning into, even though it was AMC, America, what was it, America something Classics? And their other stuff were old movies, but, maybe you could do an old monster movie thing or a classic monster movie thing. I don't know. But, yeah, so really, at the end of the day, I don't think The Walking Dead is worth fixing. It's towards the end of its run. It's really overstayed its welcome, in my view. And it should probably just shut down so we could start over with something new. So that's my 2 cents. Thanks.